All right, so we are back. This is part three of, or this is part four. Sorry, this is part four of four on To Parent or Not. And so we ended here, I believe, ending with a quote: although women who have had abortions and women who have had children are often perceived as two distinct groups, in reality, they're the same women at different times and points in their life. And so I wanted to stress, like I did last segment, is that they're not two different categories of women, right? So a lot of times our mind says, okay, this person had an abortion, therefore they didn't have children. Oh, and these people have children, so therefore they didn't have abortions. And that's just not true. 30% of women have reported having abortions, and they are the same category of women. So maybe someone had an abortion as a teenager and then they later on had a family. Maybe they had a family and later on had an abortion, or maybe there was a rape and they had an abortion, or just a range of different examples and experiences could have led to an abortion, but they're the same group of women. All right, so the current status of abortion in the United States, that abortion remains legal, so it's pro-choice with restrictions, okay? Um, and so I might have mentioned this, I might have mentioned this before, but again, when the subject matter of abortion comes up, that it's just really oftentimes it lacks conversation. It's kind of debate. It becomes highly emotional, highly judgmental, and there's really little communication about the subject matter. And so here's some interesting facts, some of the stuff you may know, some of the you may not know, that actually abortion is a low risk procedure. One can go into a clinic or to a hospital and have an abortion, and and it can be a shot. It can be, I believe, there's a pill form as well. And then yes, there is kind of the whole, you go in and you medically get an abortion where there's like triceps. But that's the exception. That's not that is not the most common form. And so typically when people think of abortion, they think of folks with, protesting outside with these big, gigantic, oversized images of bloody fetuses, being pulled out with, forceps. Um, that is not the norm. So yeah, so it's actually typically a low risk procedure. We also see no impact on the ability to become pregnant. There is no causation, no scientific causation that having abortion leads to infertility. And then there's also a myth that is floating around, and I'm not sure where it came from, but that there is no connection to having abortion and later on having breast cancer. Also, to kind of state the obvious, or maybe not the most obvious to folks, is that abortion is already typically emotionally upsetting for the person who is considering having the abortion or has chose to have the abortion. They're already feeling riddled with guilt and fear and shame, uh, and it becomes a very difficult decision. They're not skipping to to the clinic, and I think people have this false sense of that it's not emotionally upsetting for folks. And keep in mind that they're going through that, being emotionally upset and feeling guilt and shame, and then they know what society believes, they know what strangers believe, and so that there's this social force and this layer of judgment and shame that it becomes many times kind of unbearable and embarrassing and shameful, and so people don't openly talk about their abortions. Um, Also, we don't, while it is upsetting and frightening, we don't see a direct connection to a causation to psychiatric problems, right? Having abortion does not lead to psychiatric problems. And then this one is kind of a controversial one, is that it may enhance a sense of personal empowerment, right? That might be difficult for some people to hear. That it's it's not all negative information. It's not all doom and gloom. That there's some aspects of, women reporting that they experience a sense of empowerment by making that choice and going through with their abortion. Now, think about that. Think about situations in which women would feel empowered to have an abortion, right? That doesn't mean that it's not difficult or upsetting, but that they felt that that was an empowering move. What might be some of those situations? I want you to kind of think about that for a second. To give you some examples, if you think about someone who was raped and it resulted in a pregnancy, and they made a decision to have an abortion, one could imagine how that might be a sense of empowerment for them, no matter how difficult the decision is. And so that's one example, but also the example that I mentioned about the returning student who said, you know what, I postponed my life. I'm a stay-home mom. I was a stay-home mom. I raised my children. I did everything that society asked me to do. I put my life on hold, and now it's my turn to go back to college. And then she found herself pregnant. I think I might have mentioned that story in segment 3. And so to go forward with that and say, no, this is my turn. It's my turn. This was the plan, and we're going to move forward with it. When she shared her story, you could hear the empowerment in her voice. And it wasn't that she wasn't, that it wasn't a difficult decision for her, but you could hear that sense of empowerment. And so those are some examples, but there's many more. So moving on. So that's folks that have had an abortion or had abortions. Now, we're going to switch gears to another taboo subject matter that people typically don't talk about, and that's infertility. And all infertility is not the same. But again, these are subjects that people don't typically talk about, or if someone mentions that they've had a miscarriage or is having a difficult time conceiving, that people get awkward and uncomfortable, and then the person that's going through it feels awkward and uncomfortable, right? So we don't necessarily create social spaces to talk about all of this. So all infertility is not the same. And so the first one is involuntary infertility, wanting to conceive or bear a child, but physically unable to do so, right? So this is typically what we're looking at as we say the word infertility, right? There is what's called impaired fertility, where a woman or a couple who has some physical barrier to pregnancy or who has not been able to carry a pregnancy to term. So they may in fact be able to get pregnant, and you may know folks like this, or you yourself might have experienced this, where there's no problem getting pregnant. You can get pregnant, but you can't hold the fetus, and then the baby to term, right? So these folks might have multiple miscarriages that can be just kind of devastating, miscarriage after miscarriage. 12% of American women and 7% are infertile. So there's also secondary infertility. So people typically think that once you have a child, you just kind of stay fertile, but that's not the situation. You can have 1 child, 2 child, and you want a 3rd child, and now you're experiencing infertility, right? So this is a woman or a couple who has had children previously, but now cannot, right? And so there's kind of women along the spectrum and couples along the spectrum that are experiencing this infertility. Maybe there's a medical concern with the woman, or a medical concern with the man in the situation, or really to be able to think about the infertility in the sense of, I think about the context of like same-sex relationships, right? They can't biologically have children, so they have to go through a medical procedure and kind of a whole nother path to be able to have children, and it can be a very expensive path. Okay, so moving on, continuing on this subject matter, infertility services and reproductive technology, assisted reproductive technology. So I want you to write down that, and the acronym is ART, right? So the acronym is ART. So assisted reproductive technology. So know both for test purposes, because a lot of times I don't call it assisted reproductive technology. I'll just call it ART. And so I want you to know what I'm talking about. So 44% of women with fertility problems sought medical help. This is according to your book. And I don't remember. Yeah, well, that's okay. Well, so again, from your book, persons dealing with infertility experience feelings of anger, sadness, helplessness, wounded manhood, wounded womanhood, and often see themselves as failures. And this is a very, again, like I said, a very sensitive subject matter that that we typically don't talk about. So I got 3 minutes. This only records up until 15 minutes. So let me get this through. So again, so the aspect of people might question in their faith, they might say, what's, God, if they believed in a God, why have you done this to me? Are you punishing me? There's a sense of like blaming themselves, blaming their partner, women feeling like not real women, men feeling like not real men, and really seeing themselves as failures. Also, it's a costly process. So there's an exception. It's an exception for some states where they'll pay for infertility treatments, but not the entire treatment. There's several treatments that need to take place in like one visit, or there's like a series of shots, and they're very expensive. So if your insurance doesn't cover all of it or part of it, then it might become an accessibility issue for you. So yes, so there are some concerns, reproductive technology and social ethical issues. One is the commercialization of reproduction, the dehumanizing process of parents and bodies, and treatment as procedures, eggs and sperm becoming the commodity for profit, fertility clinics, marketing issues, fraud, inflated success rates, multiple birth risks, inequality and affordability concerns, the question of who is really the parent. So again, we're looking at the process. Clinics in a capitalist society, which we live in, it becomes a commodification. It becomes we're buying and selling sperm and eggs, and they're profiting off of this, and really profiting off of really desperate folks that want to be parents. And that comes at risks, also multiple birth risks, but also these clinics oftentimes inflate their success rates, hoping that they won't get caught. And if you are spending thousands of dollars, you're going to go with the clinic that has the higher rate of success rate, right? Which they might just say it, but that's not really the truth. They might not have that high degree of success rate. So it becomes an issue of affordability. Who can receive these services? Who can afford it? And then also the question of who really is the parent. There's the genetic parent, the parent that it gives their egg and the sperm, the gestational parent, the parent that carries the child, the social parent, the parent that raises, so the social mom, the social father. You have the genetic father and also the social father. So really the question of who's the real parent, right? And I could do a survey and people would be all along the spectrum of who really is the parent. There is no clear answer. I want to end here, and I need to end quickly. There's also what's called made-to-order children. This is where there's embryo screening technology, examining fertilized eggs before implementation to choose or eliminate certain ones. So this is really sex selection and other traits. It was created out of a medical condition for medical purposes. And us humans, we always take it to another level. And so there's actually some famous stars who have taken this because they can afford to do this, where they're literally saying, I want a girl. And so they're using this, again, fertilized eggs before implementation to choose and to eliminate ones. Okay, this one will be a girl, and implant and create that implantation so they can have the sex of their choice. That's really dangerous with some really ethical implications. What are we doing as a society, and what are those consequences of what we may be doing? So think about that. I'm going to end there. El fin. Thank you all. You take care, and we're finally done. All right. Bye.